Hello, we're live.
Hello.
Hello, everyone, for the first non-Sanderson Crit Club. Way!
Yay!
Yes, we can also now officially introduce ourselves in our new book club because we ended our last live show with like, yeah, there's some plans and like whatever. Welcome to the Quarterly Crit Club, which is a book club that was born out of suffering.
I love that, honestly.
It is true. It is very true.
And now hopefully goes towards a brighter future. Yes. Let's introduce ourselves. I'm Sarah. I am still currently on hiatus. This is like the first video since January on my channel. But I have sent in my master's thesis this week. So expect videos back in June, I guess. But yeah, moving on.
Me. Hello, I'm Salah. I also don't really post anything on my channel right now because I'm still adjusting to working and university at the same time. But you know what? Actually, maybe making June a comeback month for the queer girls is a very good idea. So maybe I'll be working on that too.
Yeah, I need to at least upload like a queer recommendations video again. I cannot lose my stream.
Heck yeah.
As you should.
Which, funnily enough, consistently, ever since I uploaded my first queer recommendations video, that video has been in my top 5 most watched videos of the month, week, whatever. Like very first one. It's amazing. Anyway.
Heck yeah, we love to see it. Yeah. Okay, and I think it's my turn. So hi, I'm Steph, in case you don't know. I do post regularly. So
we are very proud of her.
Thank you. I'm a hardworking book reviewer.
Yeah.
I read mostly horror and sci-fi and nonfiction. But these two are leading me into my fantasy days, and I can say that I have 2 recommendations now. Yes.
Don't worry, they will multiply like cells. It's gonna be fine.
So the intentions of this book club started. It obviously started with Stormlight Archive critical reread / read for the first time in the case of Wind and Truth, and we decided we want to continue on with reading critically. And I think this book actually right now is the perfect example that reading critically, while it does in certain circles have, a bad reputation, reading critically doesn't mean hating a book. It can in fact mean the absolute opposite. And so as first official book, I forced Scylla and Steph to read Blood Over Brighthaven with me, which was one of my absolute favorite books last year.
I do love the fact that every single one of us has a slightly different copy.
Yeah.
You have the hardcover, I have the paperback.
Oh, yeah. Also, my cat did this, so,
Yeah, you can also see it up here. I also have the broken binding. I could get it. However, this one has my tabs.
So that's what I need to tab. Yes, I did annotate the heck out of this, but I did not tab. So.
I tabbed.
Very nice.
Yes, we love to see that.
I'm so excited. Like after all of the things that we went through last year, reading Brandon Sanderson and being like, this is unacceptable. I'm so happy that our first pick feels like it has validated all of our complaints because it was done impeccably well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, not gonna lie, that was also a reason why I wanted to push this, because I knew that like a lot of the themes that we had the most complaints about in Stormlight did come up here in different contexts, obviously, because Stormlight doesn't really have like academia context, but yeah.
Interestingly enough, Stormlight Archive could have academic context if Brandon Sanderson cared about having academics properly put in his text. So, even there, this is the antithesis of what we went through last year.
Mhm.
That's true. In terms of antithesis, do we want to turn things around? We used to start with the few things that we loved. Do we want to turn things around and talk about the things we didn't like?
Yeah.
I mean, I've only got one. So
Go ahead. The stage is yours.
I mean, I guess I wasn't prepared to start with this, but yeah, sure, whatever. So, okay, should we preface by saying that we're not doing spoilers, I'm assuming? Are we doing spoilers?
I would say we're doing spoilers. So
yeah.
I don't think we can talk about this book
without
spoiler free.
Yeah, okay, cool.
So like if you haven't read this
and you still want to read it without being spoiled, this is your moment to leave us.
I don't think necessarily this is a book that's like that lives. I mean, there's one thing that I would say probably is better if you don't know going into it and like seeing the slow reveal, which is like the whole thing with the magic systems. Aside from that, I don't think it's necessarily a book that's harmed by being spoiled a lot, but I'm not someone who cares a lot for spoilers, so who am I to talk?
That's yeah, so I don't know if I'm going to be able to properly explain why this one thing was the only thing that I wasn't a fan of without giving more context, but it's okay. So it's not a romance by any means. This is not a romance. I wouldn't even call what happens a romance. Even though, so we have two main characters that we get POVs from directly. And that is, okay, I've been saying her name Siona because I feel like the C is more silent, but what's the right way of saying it?
Oh,
I don't know.
Okay.
I think we only get like a what's it called? An explanation how it's said with Tomil.
Yeah.
But I don't even remember what that was. So
okay.
The explanation with Tomil is just that instead of it being a TH like in English, it's more like a soft D.
Yeah.
That's the Tomil explanation.
Yeah. So we get Siona and Tomil's POVs, and throughout what they go through, which we will explain at some point, there becomes this kind of like tension between the two of them that is a longing, but I wouldn't necessarily say that it is. I didn't feel like it was a romantic longing. I feel like it was a longing that was created because of the extreme pressures that they are under, and that they are both looking for some sort of like release or some sense of hope to hold on to. And so they kind of became that for each other in some way, which led to them having a kiss. So personally, I feel like we didn't need that. And I also I see where Siona was starting to have what we can perceive as romantic thoughts about Tomil at one point. But from his POV toward her, I wasn't really feeling it so much. And I kind of wish that didn't happen. But I feel like we need more context as to why I feel that way.
I have, funnily enough, I think that's one of the things that I've been thinking about the most, because, my reasoning was always like, I in the end don't mind that it's there, but I don't think it's necessary. And it actually leads into something that I wanted to talk about, and that's that this book is a really interesting combination of plot and character forward and narrative forward. Like usually I would put books into two types of character types, genre fictions. You have those ones where you often have heroic fantasy and Sanderson, where it's like it's about the characters, it's about the plot, it's about, like, Sanderson doesn't manage, but like it's about fully fleshing out the characters, and the characters need to act in a way that makes sense. And then you have the types of books where I would say modern fairy tales and retellings often fall into, where maybe fully fleshing out the characters is secondary because it's like about narrative and structure and archetypes.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this book mixes both in a way. And so, like, I think from one type of writing perspective, Tomil falling in love with Stiona doesn't make sense because you don't get that many chapters from his point of view, so you don't really see it. You mostly see, especially in the first half, up until the point where you find out what the magic is, you mostly see Skiona having all these intense microaggressions against him and him reacting to that. So like that's kind of their dynamic that's in your head. But I think the reason why I have switched kind of on that I didn't need it is because of, and I tried to find it, but I stopped tabbing at the end because I was just crying. But
Valid.
There's this inner monologue that Tomil has just before leaving the city, where he's kind of talking about why romance always went wrong for him, and how him and Skiona, even if everything hadn't happened, would never have worked, because for her, being with a man would have given up something, like being with a man within the society would have given up something essential to her. And same thing for him being with someone who is essentially a colonizer. And so I think the reason, like the main reason why we get the romance isn't for character reasons, but for narrative reasons.
Mm-hmm.
It's so we can have that narrative point of they are too different because of the system, and their situations are too different that it could never work no matter their feelings.
Mm-hmm.
I think I found it, by the way. It's
Oh,
on
yes,
page 393 on my edition. And I'm just going to read the short paragraph here. They both
Yeah.
knew this was a delusion, a precursor to something that could never be. They couldn't have this. Tomil couldn't really belong to a Tiranish woman, and Skiona couldn't really belong to any man without losing some vital part of themselves. There was no future here. Tomil could never meet Skiona's family, nor endure the scorn of her archmage father figure. Skiona would never have to shiver through a dark winter in Tomil's homeland. There was only this moment, and its isolation rendered it invincible.
Yeah. So, and I think that's where, in this element specifically, the dissonance comes from. And I think with a lot of the other elements in the story, where you have like narrative versus characters, Emil Wang was really like managed to intertwine the two amazingly. In this one, this aspect, I'm not sure. I don't think she managed it as perfectly as she could have,
Mm-hmm.
if it was even possible.
I do think that this paragraph in particular is what kind of brings it to its narrative point, so to speak, right? Like, this is the moment where, at least for me, I was like, yeah, I am fully on board with this, actually. I do agree that towards more of the, like, I would say middle-ish part of the book, where Tomil starts thinking rather, well, not entirely nicely about Skiona. He still has a lot of points where he fully disagrees with her and also challenges her and everything. But there are some moments in his inner thought process where it's like, okay, I mean, I guess I can see that she is nicer to you than the average Tiranish citizen, but I don't fully see the connect here between having that and then falling in love in a way. Like, there were some scenes where it felt a little bit too forced and a little bit too far into the uncomfortable territory of, oh, the oppressor is nice to me, so I'm falling in love with them. So I understand that people have problems with this. I personally think that towards the ending, especially with this paragraph and that scene in particular, Emma Wang brings it full circle and manages to do everything no notes, which is also why I gave this book 5 stars anyway. But I understand where people are coming from when it comes to this, right? This critique, I'd say.
Yeah. I mean, I still gave it 5 stars regardless of that, but that part, it really left me uncomfortable because, like you said, we only see the microaggressions. And like, there's even a point where when they're having open and honest conversation where she's crying and he's, him and Kara are saying like, you don't deserve our sympathy just because you finally had this realization. And so because of that, and combined with the fact that we get so little of his POV, I don't see any reason for him to have moved beyond the discomfort that she has brought him, even though she is leading to potential liberation. Like, that's not enough for him to care about her beyond, I would think, like maybe a friend or an ally. And if anything, the way that I personally wanted this to play out was her having these romantic feelings and being rejected by him at some point and saying like, I understand where you're coming from. And I see that because I think this could have been a very good moment or opportunity to critique how there are certain people who are of like, since Sayona is a metaphor for white women, I'll just use that as the primary example, who become so obsessed with this idea of creating social justice that they're no longer listening to the voices of those that they are advocating for, but doing what they think is necessary, right? Which we do see in here as far as her like having to step back and listen. But because of that, I feel like this could have also been an opportunity for us to show her taking this obsession to like a very unhealthy personal level. And him saying like, who are you really doing this for? Which could just cycle us back into the whole point of why she is the way that she is. So I just feel like that was a missed opportunity. And so for that reason, I was getting her having romantic thoughts. I wasn't feeling him having romantic thoughts, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
absolutely. It's the reciprocity that's a little bit of an issue, I feel like, at some points. And I do also agree that this is probably also partially because I understand why we don't get a lot of Tamil perspective chapters, but I do believe that in this particular regard, this is actually a detriment. Simply because if we wanted a bit more of that, like, romance that is technically still doomed, because that's kind of the whole point, right? Like, it is not even supposed to be a romance. Again, that is the point of the paragraph. It's like, it's one singular moment. That is the only thing we get, and that is also why in some regard the moment still works, because it is so isolated from everything else. But the lead up was still a tiny bit questionable, and so again, I understand why people sometimes don't vibe with it.
I think something that's also hard in terms of because we don't get to see that many of their interactions, and I think something else that's also in that regard of like her being our POV chapter, I think we as the reader see more microaggressions than she actually like externalizes towards Tamil. I don't know how to explain it, because we see her in her monologue and her thinking, oh, he's untypical for a Quen, oh, he's that, oh, he's that. And so we have all of that, but there's not that many instances outside the situations where they are actively in conflict with each other where she expresses those emotions. Which obviously does not excuse it, but like it could seem differently, like the interactions could be more on an eye level than they read from her inner monologue.
I mean, there is I found one sentence I found one sentence in that regard, where she starts explaining things to Tom and he starts catching on to the magic system. And her inner thought here, which she doesn't vocalize, is thank goodness Tommy seemed a little sharper than the average Quinn. Which is and this is kind of what we mean. Like, these microaggressions, a lot of them are not said out loud, even though they are very likely still present in her mannerisms and everything, right? Like, that is obviously not to be denied. But because we as the reader are in her head and we witness basically every single thought that she goes through, and a lot of them, when talking to Tamil, are steeped in these microaggressions, are steeped in this understanding of what the Quen are and what they aren't, and what Tamil is and what he isn't and can't be from her perspective. Because of that, it seems a lot more one-sided. And I do agree that this might be why the romance from his perspective doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, because we've been stuck in Skiona's head this entire time and been going, no, like, why? No.
I will. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I will say also, I think I'm like, personally, I would be like the way it is, or have no romance at all. Because I think, on the other hand, if it was like not reciprocated, I don't think it would work for Skiona's narrative as a character. I think we could once again have another important narrative in terms of white women and white women interacting with marginalized men, where again we would put a certain type of narrative before the character of Skiona, if that makes sense. Just as it is now, where the narrative of two people within the system that can never be together is put before, does it make sense for Dommel's character?
I will also say one thing that I would like us to very quickly talk about, if we have any thoughts, that is one criticism I've seen of this book quite a few times. That is true, but sometimes the thoughts don't make sense.
What's the thought?
So one thing that I've seen people critique about this book, or talk about negatively sometimes when it comes to this book, is the choice to have the narrator be the bigoted person, have the narrator be the, in this case, quite literal, the white woman who is, yes, in some aspects marginalized because she is a woman, but in other aspects absolutely not marginalized because she is still belonging of the superior race TM, aka the people in power, synonymous to whiteness in this case. And I would like to ask if we have any thoughts on this. Do we agree? Do we disagree? What are we saying?
I completely disagree with that complaint. Because the thing is that we cannot depend on, the whole point of the story is to see someone coming to terms and processing their role in maintaining this hierarchy. And we cannot depend on people or authors who are benefiting from those hierarchies to be able to break it down with the level of complexity and nuance that someone who is oppressed under those hierarchies can do. Because Emma Wong, being a marginalized author themselves, understands what they're working up against versus what I'm going to use Brandon Sanderson as an example, because that's where all this started. Our thoughts in this project, long-term project, started from, is that they can't relate to what it is to be on the other side of wielding that oppression. So I think it's completely appropriate and understandable that if anyone is going to be able to thoroughly write a character that is coming to a reckoning with their white guilt, it is probably going to be a POC author.
Also, I'm going to say the thing that I have said multiple times already. Yes, Skiona is the POV character. Skiona is not the heart of the story. She is not whom the story is about. Dommel is the person whom the story is about. We see that already in the framing. We get the first chapter from his POV, the last chapter from his POV. It's about his journey, maybe not on a personal level. Yes, the one that whom we follow kind of on a more personal level is Skiona. But she is not whom the story is about in its essence. She is not the person. Yes, we want to see development in her, but she is not the person that we ultimately want to survive, or see survive. I mean, yes, we want to see her survive, obviously, but like and in the narrative, it's not the white savior narrative, or like the narratives that we see so often, where the black and brown people's, or the POC people's journey serves to push the journey of our white main character forward. Tommel, within the narrative, even though we don't get to see his POV that much, always is on an equal playing field with her. He isn't there to push her narrative forward. He isn't there to teach her lessons. He does, yes, because that's what happens in this type of journey. But he doesn't have to suffer so she can learn things.
I do also want to say,
but he suffers for his own, like because it's fucked.
It sure is fucked. I do also want to say, when it comes to the whole, like, as you've already kind of elucidated the framing thing of like having the first chapter be from his POV as well as the last one, something very interesting that also happens is this right here is precisely where his second POV chapter comes in, exactly the half of the book.
Yeah.
And I don't think this is unintentional, actually. Which, in my opinion, can bring us possibly towards the positive things we have to say about this book, because I don't know about you guys, but
I mean,
I have another thing where I'm not sure yet if I'm positive or negative on this, because I remember sending like when the art for the Wraithmark Blood Over Brighthaven came out, I remember sending that voice message to Scylla, actually. And that's like how we picture characters and how characters are imagined. I don't think we get that many physical descriptors for Skiona. And for the Quen and for Tommel specifically, we get he has red hair. I don't know if it was ginger or a darker red, but he has red hair. And they have gray eyes. I don't think we ever even get so much as a skin color. We get that his hands are very calloused because he's working a lot. However, in the art, in the Wraithmark, and Wraithmark usually works together very much with the authors, so I assume this was, greenlit by ML Wang. Tommel is phenotypically white. Which I think, like, and again, I don't know what I think about it, is so very interesting, because for me, typically, if I know the ethnicity of the author, and if there's not like that many physical descriptors for the characters, I just picture them somewhat of the ethnicity of the author. Usually, that's just what I do. I used to, just because that was the go-to, I used to picture everyone white, because that's the type of world that we grow up in. And so for me, I mean, I don't generally, to be honest, actually, I don't picture characters a lot. I just I just have gray blobs in my head. But like it still surprised me when I saw the art, and it was like Tommel was white, and I was like, this, I don't know why this feels wrong. And I don't know if it's like a problem on my part, that someone who has in a story a traditionally marginalized and BIPOC narrative and indigenous narrative needs to look like real life indigenous people, which I don't think it should be. But then at the same time, I also wonder whether or not it was purposefully done that ML Wang chose red hair as the Quen hair type, because red hair, I mean, white people aren't the only people who have red hair. At least not anymore. I don't know if like historically, yada yada, whatever. There's plenty of other ethnicities that can also have red hair. But it's a hair type that we typically, just like blonde, connect with whiteness. At the same time, it's also the thing. I mean, it was this trend recently once again that like gingers are black people. I don't know if you saw on TikTok.
Yeah, I've seen that. Yeah.
And it used to be a long time also historically in media when you wanted to denote marginalization, but it was before a time when we really talked about inclusivity. You used redheaded people, or you described someone as being a redhead. That was like, and so I'm like, I don't actually know what my point is and where I'm going with
I think I know
it.
what your point is if you want me to jump in. So like,
But, like,
okay, I feel like
to me.
also we have people in the chat too, so I want to get
Oh,
to catching up with our friends in the chat because people are here. Hi friends.
Hello.
But I feel like it was completely intentional, especially because we have a scene where Siona looks through the mirror, and when she does her experiment, that person that she siphons from specifically is described as having darker skin, full black eyes, and dark black hair. So we can clearly see that this is a brown person of what specific ethnicity we don't know. So I feel like it is very much important because what I think that the author wanted us to focus on is just the ways in which these systems that make racism a functioning aspect of society are extended beyond to other people, as it has been in the past with like the Irish, and it's still equally as unreasonable. And that I feel like if Tomo had been black or brown, it would have made it more white saviory for me. So I'm glad that he wasn't.
That's fair.
Yeah.
I think this is always a little bit of a hard question to answer because I remember having this problem as well when watching The Expanse. This is something that Steph knows a bit more about than Sarah. So in The Expanse, really, really quickly, there is this concept of basically 3 nations, quote unquote. We have Earth, we have Mars, and we have the Belt. The Belt being made up of smaller planets, asteroids, and space stations that are kind of like around Mars and Earth, which is why Mars and Earth are also referred to as the inners. And the Belters are historically within that series the more oppressed people, the ones who have fled from the inners, the ones who have been pursued by the inners, the ones who are exploited by the inners, who have horrible living conditions, have a very strict hierarchy of people who have more access to things versus people who have absolutely nothing, etc., etc., etc. They're also often connected to the so-called OPA, which is basically a terrorist group. It's a whole thing. And when I watched The Expanse, I didn't know how to put it into words, and I still don't really know where I stand there, but I had issues with how many of the Belters were portrayed and played by white actors.
And
I think
they were very clearly Hispanic coded and black coded. Yeah.
The problem here specifically is that there is no real solution to this, because on one hand, making all the Belters into real life right now marginalized people is kind of iffy, because you suggest that the only thing that marginalized identities of right now can do in futuristic settings is to be oppressed. That's kind of On the other hand, if especially you consistently make leading figures of ostracized members of society into white people, you kind of slip back into this idea of like, well, but the white people can be oppressed too, that's so sad. And like, yeah, but also, and again, I don't really think there's a solution to this necessarily, because both assumptions and associations are kind of very rigid thinking that strew immediately into like racist assumptions, and it's hard.
Yeah, and I feel like that's completely the fault of, racism as a concept in itself does not make sense. It's not supposed to make sense. And so for us to try to sit here and be like, well, it needs to be able to be represented in this specific way because that's the only way. Like, it functions in many different ways, and all of them are based in illogic. So, but there are certain points where it's like the author should be careful of what they're doing and what exactly it is that they are trying to say, because this does, as fiction does, it holds up a mirror to society. And so we need to be very clear into what we're saying here.
Absolutely. I think for me, it's also, once again, this thing where, but it's not something that is like ML Wang's fault or our fault or whatever. It's more something like that literature wide we need to look at, where I'm like, okay, I assume it's an Asian author, so I assume ethnically these people are generally Asian. Again, I'm saying Asian right now. I realize Western Asia is very different from Eastern Asia. But then, okay, but why would I assume just because the author is Asian that the characters are also Asian? Isn't that kind of prejudiced? Okay, so everyone's white. But okay, now we go back to like everyone being like white being the norm, etc. And going back to that, which is also maybe something that we need to like divorce ourselves from, where then like I think about it, and like Tyrannish society, yes, has a lot of like structural problems, but like from a cultural perspective, I would say yes, you have like Feiner and Feiner's feast, and like we know it's going towards this big celebration, but there's not really that many, I would say, cultural markers in the world building that would denote a specific region of the world.
That the Quen are being compared to?
Not even the Quen, but also the Tyrannish.
Yeah, like the most we have is like the religious systems in place, which do reek very much of Christianity. But again, that does not narrow it down whatsoever.
Yeah.
Also, to answer Sky's question, she's Chinese American.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I should have said Asian heritage. Sorry.
Yeah, and like I think there's also like coming back to the whole like Tamil being represented in the art as having at least light skin, if we can phrase it like that, light skin and red hair, which again, the red hair is canon. We know that this is happening in the descriptions. I think there is something to be said about how the one victim that Skiona like specifically has in front of her being of a darker skin complexion versus the one Quen character who specifically gets a big voice both within the narrative as well as within Skiona's story being a lighter skinned Quen, because again we could have racist assumptions here of like, there's marginalized people, but then there's marginalized people who have more of a privileged access to society. It just becomes a bit of a mess every now and then, and I don't really know how to divorce ourselves from the mess.
I don't think, like, for me the like dark skin, which again is like, it's hard because in our current system there's no such thing as just an innocent choice or whatever. But for me also the dark skinned girl, I think more so was described the way she was to really show how far away Skiona went to source this magic. Like, this is not the near vicinity where everyone seems somewhat similar. Yes, Quen are different from Tyrannish, but like this is like fully somewhere else.
Yeah. But I will say that relating this to how the story ends and Siona's ultimate sacrifice that was made, I enjoyed it because I feel like we're at a point right now, at least here in the States, and I think anywhere where fascism is a problem right now, we're having a similar experience, which is like we need white people of Siona's demographic to make this realization and step up and do the right thing. It doesn't mean that necessarily we need, like, the world is depending on white saviorism to solve the problem of, like, fascist regime. But, like, we cannot exist in a place where only the people who are functioning daily as the more oppressed groups are the only ones with the answers, because those with the wealth and those with the power are not listening to those answers. So I feel like this book is very relevant right now, especially with at least with the movement that we're seeing here in the States, or maybe that I'm just seeing in my part of the States, where I'm seeing more white people have that turnaround moment of, oh shit, I was the problem. Let me shut the fuck up and go talk to some other people who were right the whole time.
I think that's the thing that I'm not going to say love about the ending, but appreciate about the ending, because we kind of have two disrupt the system moments. We have the moment with the Franian mirror, where Skiona does notice, oh shit, I should have shut the fuck up. Shut the fuck up. Shut it the fuck up. And listened to Tamil. He told me all along it wouldn't be the Tyrannish who suffer. It would be the Quen who suffer. And so we get that moment. And then we also get at the end, it's ultimately not like, yes, Skiona is the one who pushes Tamil to activate the spell web. But it is not her that makes the decision to actually activate it. So we still have the agency of the oppressed person making the decision. But at the same time, a thought that just came to my mind that I found very interesting is that overall this book is not a revolution narrative. It can't be, because we follow 2, maybe 3 people if you follow Kara. 3 people is not a revolution.
Yeah.
It's
not really.
the narrative is basically just leaving isn't the solution, at least not in this case, because just leaving would mean leaving a system in place that still siphons people. But at the same time, it's like, let's just destroy this and then leave it behind. We don't care about making it better. We don't care about saving the system or saving these people. These are not our people. We just want to fuck shit up enough that we can leave with the least amount of worry about ourselves.
Actually really like that.
It's just also I think to me what jumped out is the limit of cruelty that is okay to make people experience if they are other or blind spots. I think, and that is like, yes, Emma Wang is not exactly subtle. She has inner monologues that like literally spell out the thesis of the current realization. I do not care about that personally, and like I think it's actually so well done. Like, where is it? Skiona coming to the realization. Like, I think Emma Wang always knew in who needs to be Skiona's opposite to make the point in the best way possible. And it's like when she comes to the realization that Tyran doesn't care about the Quen, when it's like Tommel was right. Skiona had miscalculated, because if Alba, kind, giving, infinitely patient Alba, met the truth with violent denial, what chance did the rest of Tehran have?
Oh god, that scene was so good.
So good.
It's like, yes, put her across from the character who has so far been only kind, only giving,
Mm-hmm.
just
Mm-hmm.
everything, and that character not caring.
Yeah. I was so happy with, even though it was very straightforward and like saying this is exactly what's going on right now. The author is not mincing words with what they want the reader to walk away from this with, but it allowed Tommel and Kara and the characters that we did see, they were allowed to be angry, and there was something beautiful about finally seeing a character be allowed to be angry.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like there never was forgiveness. Like
Mm-hmm.
there never had to be a scene. So often in other situations or in other books, there has to be a scene where like, yes, I'm angry, but I forgive you. You personally can't do anything, and you have come to a change. So yada yada.
Okay, I will
And,
say
and
as a caveat that Tommel kissing Siona felt like an act of forgiveness to me in some way, but I don't think that was the point. I think that's
no.
just a interpretation, like my interpretation
Mm,
of that, and that's another part layer of the reason why I feel like I didn't want him to kiss her.
yeah.
I would have wanted her to have rejected feelings, but that's
Yeah, I think Skiona is very interesting, and I'm still not 100% on my feelings about it. I think it's like a valid interpretation and a valid way to go about it, but like the fact that Skiona is hope.
mm-hmm.
Um like I think it's literally said at the very end. Like
It is, yeah.
that's who she is supposed to be. And I think that's why we get the kiss, because to a certain extent Tommel allows himself to hope through her. And
Mm-hmm.
hope doesn't necessarily mean that they will be together or everything will be better or whatever. But more so hope in the direction of, no, these people didn't change, but people in general can change. And there is hope worth fighting for.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is something, I said this in the Discord as well, and I think this is a very good point to put that here. I appreciated this book not just for the fact that characters, especially the oppressed character groups, get to be angry, but because Tommel specifically gets to be a cynic.
Mm-hmm.
Because in so many books, especially when it comes to conversations between the privileged and the oppressed, we often, especially if they go somewhere down the romance route, we often have these scenes where the cynical character who's like, none of this is worth anything and we can't change anything. The system is built to pummel us to the ground. The system is built to oppress us. The system is built to keep us small. More often than not, in a lot of storylines that do and deal in some regards with revolutions against an oppressive system, we have these scenes where the cynical character gets proven wrong. We have these scenes where someone else is like, no, but like we can fight it, and like, yeah, sure, sometimes it's not the whole like power of friendship thing, but there is still a tendency to have a cynical character feel like an outcast in a cast of characters who are all supposed to carry hope, especially for the reader. It is for readers' benefit that seems like that happen. And in Blood of a Bright Haven, even though there is an end that can be interpreted as a good ending for a good amount of the cast, not all of them by any means, but still, here we are. Even with a character who is then explicitly named Hope, because for the longest time she clung to the belief falsely or not, that there was something that was going to be able to change within the incredibly horrible society that she was a part of. With all of that in mind, Tamil never has to outwardly change his mind. And that is so important to me. He never has to be like, oh yeah, Skiona, I'm sorry, I misjudged you. Or, oh yeah, Skiona, you're right. Like, obviously the system can change. Obviously we can do something. He was allowed to be bitter. He was allowed to be downtrodden by everything that was put in his path. He was allowed to say, no, they're not going to change. And there are moments where he softens it a bit, is basically kind of like in the lines of like, I understand that you wanted to believe this, Skiona, and I am sorry that you had to see it like this. However, there is just nothing to be done. And he consistently got to keep that opinion because he was vindicated every step of the way.
Yeah, it's and like the whole thing is, and there I will say, I think it is worth criticism that the character who impersonalizes that is the character who belongs to the oppressive system. But at the same time, I also don't think, like, when you think about structures, I think it's really hard for people from the marginalized community to personify hope in the way that Skiona does.
Yes. And you know what I'm going to recommend? I think this is like amazing timing. So my other book club annotation station, our nonfiction pick for May was Rehearsals for Living by Robin Maynard and Leanna Birasamasake Simpson, who are Black and Indigenous authors. And they're talking to each other about their experiences living in Canada throughout the recent pandemic. And that story is very much about the idea of hope and who gets to have hope, and how the hope that they're hoping to create is coming from both of their communities and disrupting the systems that have affected both of their communities, whether that be like laws and land regulation and the way that that's impacted Indigenous communities, or police brutality against Black communities. And so the reason I think that relates to this is this idea that book brings forward, which is that hope is a privilege that not many people get to have. And the more intersectional someone is, the easier I think it is to rationalize moving forward in a way that I don't think fits the common conception of hope. Just because someone is surviving doesn't necessarily mean that there is a quality of life there that is consistent with an idea of hope. And that Siana personifying that is a continuous reflection of who she is and who she has been able to be until she gets to the final stage where she knows exactly what she needs to do, and that her hope becomes something more extended beyond herself, more external, and what she hopes to go forward when she's no longer.
What I think is also interesting there is the moment where she becomes, or like the moment where Tamil himself also refers to her as hope, is the moment Skiona becomes an instrument, not a person. Because the last scenes of the book are specifically Skiona being an instrument of destruction for the Quen. It's not about her as a person anymore. And this is precisely where the system falls apart, because the system is trying to contain her as a person. They are prosecuting her as a person. They are trying to pin everything on her in some regard through history, through the historical annals that they have been censoring and will continue to censor, or would continue to censor if, you know, the ending didn't exist. Because, you know, there's no censors left at this point. Huzzah! But this is precisely where she sees this being a person that becomes an instrument. And she herself refers to that as well, where she says that she kind of hopes that this is not going to be about her at all anyway. The only thing she wants to be is the catalyst for change. And the one who quite literally pushes the button is Tamil.
I think I want to just random topic change because this has been on my mind. Am I the only one, or is Skiona very autistic coded?
No, she is kind of.
Yeah.
I feel
Like,
I
it.
can see that.
I'm sorry. Like, very stereotypical TikTok diagnosis of autism type thing. But like, she's driven, she is hyper focused on magic, like so hyper focused. She is socially terrible.
Social cues who?
Also, it's also this funny thing in between. I think I mentioned this once before, in Skiona's interactions with Tommel, where it's like in her brain, yes, she constantly has microaggressions, but she doesn't necessarily treat him from up above because he's Quen, but just because she does it that way with everyone. To a certain extent, while still also being racist. It's this really weird thing. And there's this one situation where she's like, huh, of course I had never asked him. Why would I ask a Quen that? And it's like, Skiona, yes, you're like, why would I ask the Quen that? But you also didn't ever ask anyone else about their you forgot the name of your neighbor who gave you muffins in the morning. So socially terrible, very driven, but also intense intense feeling of
Social justice.
social
Yeah.
justice.
Yeah.
To the point, and like again, the autistic, I forgot what it's called, like the concept of justice in autism doesn't necessarily mean social justice. It can be whatever construct of justice you build, and if it's the law, then you're absolutely like, everyone has to follow the law, and that's it. But like, she has this concept of justice that is so like just obvious to her, to the point that she just like she can't see how anyone else would react or act outside of this.
I think what I would say is her reactions once she realizes how everything actually functions outside of her view of what justice should be. And there are particular scenes where she has to try to, like, she fails so I'm not going to say miserably, because she succeeds in her ultimate goal, but like, she cannot for a second not say exactly what she thinks needs to be said, regardless of what the consequence may be. She cannot create even a temporary persona of pretending to exist in order to manipulate a situation, because it goes so against her rigid way of like functioning, and anything that is not exactly the way that the world should be under my moral compass is not even an option.
I think the best example of this is when she is certain that she's gonna die, and her mentor, I've forgotten his name because I fucking hate this guy. Hi, Roro. When her mentor basically tells her, like, you can write a letter to your family, and even within that letter, she is unable to tell her aunt that she is sorry for what has happened, because she's not. Like, she does feel guilt for the fact that people have died because of the riots that have started because of what she did, but she only feels guilty in the same sense that everyone would feel guilty when people are dying. That's it. She doesn't feel sorry about what she's done because she is utterly convinced that it is the right thing. And so even with family who might, want to have a little bit more of a substantial loving relationship with her, and
she's gone.
Jilla, can you hear us?
Hello, you're gone.
I'm back.
Your basement fucked us over.
No. She's frozen.
Yeah.
Oh. Okay, hopefully she comes back. Hi,
Yeah.
Roro. Hi, everyone.
Hello. I think this was on the Hope
okay.
nonfiction discussion.
Yes. How have you read it? I'm so excited to talk about it. It was good. Yeah,
I am, by the way, I'm so excited to be able to read nonfiction again.
Yay! That's exciting.
The past 1.5 years was pretty much just like when I read nonfiction, I forced myself to read for my master's, and now I can read fun nonfiction again. It's really interesting. Like
interesting nonfiction.
Hello, you're back.
I'm back. Yes, my internet decided to very quickly cut me off, which was rude.
Rude.
I forgot where you were.
Yeah, I don't remember where you were. I'm sorry.
I was at the point of like, you know, she can't even lie to her aunt, even though with family sometimes we like to have emotional bonds between each other that might be working better if one of us knew how to fucking lie.
Yeah. I mean, I'm totally with her. I'm like, no, fuck that shit.
Yeah.
They don't deserve they don't deserve to be lied to for their own peace.
Yes, actually. This is the perfect moment. I wanted to talk about Brigham because
let's go.
I love how he's like the role of the person who's trying to do good to calm their own bad conscience.
It really does, I think, reflect going back to a lot of what we're seeing today of people who genuinely support the fascist rhetoric from some of our world leaders and are not wrapping their heads around or refuse to acknowledge what comes at the cost of what they think is good for the world.
Like the whole thing with I'm the leading employer for Quen women. It's like fuck off. And
like you employ a lot of women and you also make sure that they can never bear children again. Like, okay, let's talk about that.
I loved when Skiona called it out and was like, the reason why you're trying to push me is to calm your own bad conscience. To make yourself feel like more progressive than you are.
I really liked that scene where she essentially tells him, like, stop trying to make this about me. I will not be your scapegoat. Fuck off.
Yeah.
It's such a good scene. I also want to say something because this is one of the few scenes I managed to tab while reading the last like 50-ish pages, aka where all of us started crying. And it's
I cried in the first 15 pages.
You can start crying, stop crying, and then start crying again. So
I cried in the first 15 pages. I cried when Tommel talked about being terrible for Kara, and then I cried at the end again.
Hell yeah.
Whenever we got chapters from Tommel's point of view, I cried.
Anyway, so there's this one scene. It's actually really closely towards the end. And I just want to read out the small paragraph because I personally think this is kind of like a very good point that is also currently happening in society a whole lot. And it is this one. Quen were dangerous beasts when it meant tightening control over tyrannish women. Tyrannish women were damsels when it meant tightening control over Quen. They were all hapless children when it meant denying them access to power. And it was that lack of power that made them helpless, made them monstrous, made them subject to the benevolent tyrannish men who would save them from their deficiencies. Each gear turned tidily into its neighbor in a soul-grinding system designed to sustain the men who had named the pieces and made them so. Damsel, devil, servant, wife.
Yeah. And I think, again, we talk regularly about how books nowadays more and more feel the need to spell things out instead of just letting the narrative speak for itself or letting things stand on their own. But I think in cases like this, it's just so necessary sometimes.
Mhm.
And it works so well because sometimes you just gotta have a paragraph and be like, yes, the entirety of the growth of this character led to this moment.
Exactly.
This is it.
Yeah.
It is also important to note that the scene I read from is directly after Skiona witnesses countless Quen rise up in a bloody riot that is threatening to consume the entire city because they finally learned what the mages, the high mages, actually do with their lives and how much they have been ruining their lives beyond everything else that is already going on, right? Like, it is important to note the Quen do not have a good life, period. Even when they've made it to Tiran, they don't have a good life. That's the point. But now they've learned how much worse, or like how much more control the high mages have had over their miseries. And so there's this incredible bloody riot that breaks out everywhere, which is not condemned by any of the characters. Again, this is very important to note. Like, this book does not condemn violence. In fact, it kind of condones it, actually.
Yeah, I think actually it was one of my favorite scenes when Skiona is brought out of the prison and she has this realization of what has happened, and also in her narrative vindicates the Quen and is like, I understand where this anger comes from. Also, I'm so fucking happy right now I'm behind someone who has a gun. But then we also at the same time see her horror as the gun. It's not a gun. It's a magic gun. It's
But it's essentially the same thing.
Like a giant taser, like more.
It's an object of police brutality. But we also see her horror at it being used, and at the same time also be like, if I end up dying here, I'm not gonna blame any of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I really liked that because I think the thing that Emma Wong managed to do with this book, and Skiona specifically as a character, is she lets Skiona have her own emotions, even separate from her purpose, both in the narrative as well as in the path she takes in life. And I think this is incredibly important because where some books fall really flat for me when it comes to revolutionary or revolutionary adjacent storylines is they don't allow characters to be complex. They only allow characters to be instruments of the narrative, of other characters, of the message that they're trying to put into this book. So, for instance, if there is a character who joins from a privileged class into a revolutionary movement, a lot of the times they then get kind of made into this puppet of instant agreement to everything the revolution does, which is not how humans work as people. Skiona has so many conflicting emotions about everything that goes on after a certain point in the narrative, and that is so important to me personally because it shows you that you can very much be on the side of revolution, be on the side of change, even if it is violent change, and still have human emotions about blood being everywhere, about human bodies being everywhere. And yes, it is explicitly spelled out in a lot of scenes. Like, I found another one where she kind of witnesses the riots for the first time because, you know, she has spent a bit of time in prison and doesn't really know what's going on outside. But another very important paragraph, I think, which is Skiona looking at the Quen and going, Skiona wished she could dehumanize their anger, tell herself it was as monstrous and senseless as it seemed in her fear. In her fear, this is important here. But she couldn't because it wasn't inhuman. It was Kara, knuckles white as she gripped her knife. It was Tommel, hurling her spellograph to the floor, eyes clouded with tears as he spoke of his sister's death. This was the most righteous, most logical, most human anger that could fill a soul. A second shockwave crashed through the crowd, and Skiona heard more bones snap, more cries of agony. But the Quen didn't stop coming. Why should they? Their ancestral land was ravaged, their kin blighted, their future stolen. What did they have to lose? And who in the wild world could tell them to stand down? And again, the paragraph doesn't minimize Skiona's fear because she is terrified. Understandably so. Even though her robes are probably torn a bit in places and stuff because, she has been in prison, she probably doesn't look super pristine. She's wearing white robes, which is the garment of the high mages. She is very ostensibly a high mage, which is the enemy right now. And even though she has been instrumental in showing the people what's actively going on, of course, her role is not recognized, especially not by the people who are currently rioting, because they don't know anything about her. The only thing they see is that she belongs to the enemy. And so, understandably so, she's probably very high on their hit list. And so she is afraid, because every human being would be afraid in a situation like that. But the book immediately goes, she is afraid, but also she fully understands everything that's going on. And she doesn't say that it's bad to be angry. She never says, they shouldn't have done that. She's always like, well, I mean, of course they're going to be angry. They're fucking ruined. We ruined them. Of course they're going to be mad.
Yeah. And like, the thing is, I'm sorry, on that note, I have to one more time return to Sanderson. Because one of our main criticisms was always that people or Sanderson fans never seemed to understand was always narrative and character.
Yep.
And that, yes, we do understand that just because a character has certain points of view doesn't mean the author shares them, but that it changes narrative wise.
Yes.
And we had that specifically with Dalinar, but it was also a lot of times like in the interactions and the criticisms that we had with Relane's interactions with Bridge 4. And it starts already. This is literally one of the first interactions between Tommel and Skiona. This is from Skiona's point of view. Serving as a research mage's assistant isn't that hard, she continued. I would know. I've assisted a lot of mages in a lot of labs. It's mostly following the directions. You're a Quen, right? You know how to do that. The slightest tightening in his jaw. Yes, ma'am, I can follow directions. And it's little things like that where, though, yes, Skiona is our POV character, we see so much of what Tommel is feeling as well, even though Skiona doesn't realize at the time. But we as the reader know. We see the tightening of the jaw. It's later on as well, where it's such a silly thing. It's not silly, actually. That was the wrong word. I didn't know where I was going. Where Skiona talks again. And within Skiona's lifetime, apartment complexes had grown taller, living conditions more strained. I mean, consider how the Quen Quarter has overflowed in just the last few years with your people's tendency to multiply like... A notoriously alarmist radio personality had used the word rats. Aunt Winnie always said bunnies. Skiona realized that even the latter didn't sound particularly kind with Tommy's gray eyes on her. So it's like it's there from the beginning already. But yeah.
It's just very good is what we're saying.
Yeah.
And again, this is all we wanted, because the thing about Blood of a Bright Haven, also for me as well, is the book doesn't really give a solution, right? The book doesn't give a solution to Tiranish society and to how Tiranish society can interact with Quen.
It does kind of give a solution.
Listen, like, but it's not a solution of interaction. It's a solution of no interaction, because there's nothing to interact with anymore. But like, if we just even take like the characters, there is no like solution to how Skiona and Tommel are supposed to interact. There's no easy, okay, so now I guess we're doing reparations and then everything is going to be fine kind of hand wavy situation. The book is not I don't mind it when revolutionary storylines and storylines with two characters who are so incredibly at odds with each other, depending on how much privilege they do or don't have. I don't mind it when stories like that don't have a solution. I don't mind it when they don't end tidily. we just wanted to be able to exist. We wanted to have a space within the book. And so many authors fail to do that. And it is upsetting.
Mhm. Well,
We're not asking authors to solve racism. We're asking authors to at least have the balls to accurately portray it. That's
Mhm.
it.
Yeah, and like we want Skiona to be able to cry and to be allowed to cry, but Kara at the same time to be like, it's actually really fucked up that you're crying right now.
Mhm.
Yep.
Mhm.
Like,
Yep.
I will say something that I really enjoyed about this and was aside from Kara as a character, absolutely adore
She
her,
is
love her,
so great.
she's
Oh,
so good. But the fact that towards the end, right after Siona completely destroys the magistrate building, whatever, forcing I guess the government to have to reassess whatever they're going to do going forward. But we have that one person, I forget his name, the son, whatever,
more dry.
that finds Tommel and Kara on the roof.
the silly maid.
Yes, the silly mage, yes. Um, that it's important to me that Kara brutally destroys
God,
That's not the silly mage, that's the other one. That's the
Yeah.
principal.
Oh, that,
Bren
yes, the other one.
something.
The one who they were worried about, like, oh, he's
God.
just gonna go in and reinstate everything that Siona just undid, and
Yeah.
Tyrannos Society is just gonna continue being this like necropolitical machine, eating everything that it needs in
Yeah.
order to sustain itself. So to me, it was really important that Kara disposed of him in a really brutal way because it illustrates the need, unfortunately, or that these systems that sustain themselves on violence, unfortunately, will not be brought down by peaceful means. And I think she illustrates that very well.
I do also love the thing with the spellograph that she just killed him by smashing the tool that has been used, or like a stand-in for the tool that has been used to kill their people, through his
The poetic justice is poetic justicing.
yeah.
I mean,
And
there's also, I think, a poetic justice in the fact that Siona, while she was also spaghettified, I guess is a better word.
it is actually fun fact, it is literally, it's the thing that happens to you when you get too close to a black hole.
Okay, yes, so she is spaghettified, quite literally. Okay, so the fact that she was the only person spaghettified at the magistrate who could not feel the spaghettification because she was numbed is by taking that poison, which she chose, which was her means of her like ultimate sacrifice.
By taking the poison which was forced upon her by the government that was spaghettifying in absolute terror and pain.
Yes, I think there was something beautifully poetic about, though it is some kind some ultimate karma that she falls quite literally and is part of the expansion of the dome ultimately, that she's the only one who is relieved of the pain of the experience.
Yeah. Although I do also love the poetry of Skiona. I mean, yes, she gets spaghettified also. Blighted, I think, is the official term.
Yeah.
I like spaghettified more.
Is
Okay.
is the fact that as a literary device, I guess, the way she dies is the way that Socrates died.
Yeah.
So like, she died in the same way as someone else who spoke too many uncomfortable truths for the people in power.
I also think, if we're talking about poeticness and also like symbolism and everything, I find it so intriguing to look at how Tyrannish society chooses to kill painlessly with the poison and chooses to kill with something they call like the eternal slumber or something, or slumber potion. I think something along those lines, right? That's what they call it, right? So they have so many euphemisms for death. And in her final moment, wherein she is supposed to succumb just to the euphemism of death that this society has presented her with and has concocted quite literally for her, she brings down the absolute hammer of justice that is tearing everyone to bloody shreds.
Mhm.
And I just think there is something so utterly symbolic about having a society that needs to be so removed from death, from the suffering that it needs to function, so that your everyday citizen can pretend that everything is fine and dandy. But then be brought down just as violently, just as bloody as the people they have consistently been using to fuel themselves is.
Yeah.
It's so good.
Also, again, just to return to the that Mordra will not be able to rule. I don't think that it's necessarily him that's supposed to rule specifically. I think the thing that's being done by keeping him alive is trying to avoid a power vacuum.
Mhm.
Because power vacuums are actually the thing that ruin most revolutions. I mean, if we look at the Arabian Spring, like, you know, half of the countries that disposed of their dictators during the Arabian Spring ended up either with a different dictator or a military rule or whatever. That's like kind of one of the biggest deaths of revolution, I'm gonna say, is, or even now in Syria, is that the time after is just as crucial.
Mhm.
But the time after in this book specifically, we don't care about anymore.
I
And
think what's
yeah,
also so interesting is that with a lot of revolutions, you in fact then tend to have the people in power who kind of were part of the revolution, right? That is specifically not the case here, because the people who did in fact start it, one of them is dead and the other two are leaving Tiran for
and
good.
also it wasn't the revolution technically.
Yeah.
Like it was 3 people saying fuck the system.
Okay, the
Mhm.
3 people who bombed the magistrate to the ground are no longer part of the equation of like who gets to rule, who gets to take over. And I think this is another reason. I mean, Tamil also does kind of spell it out like a little bit because he does talk about the power vacuum and everything. But I think another crucial reason why our silly mage gets to be alive is because he is not necessarily supposed to take over. He is a symbol, right? Because he is the only remaining part of the High Magistry. He is the only remaining part of the High Mages, which is something that has kept Arounder society functioning for centuries at this point. Well,
It's
maybe
300 years, I think.
yeah. So, yeah, I don't see him ruling anything, to be quite honest, because he is not even able to rule his own fear. Bless him.
Mm.
But I think the reason it's crucial for him to stay alive is because there is no one else really in that place who is in a close enough position to avoid total collapse, which could lead to something almost worse than what's currently going on.
Yeah. Also, about the bombing of the magistry, I do love, like, maybe they're silly, but I do love Skiona's just tiny little girl boss moments. I
Yeah.
love her walking into there and being like, "Hi, Dad. What's up?"
That was so good.
Amazing.
I will say there was some moments she had when she argued with some of the other high mages that I was trying to be like, yeah, go girl. Listen, do I have problems with you? Yes. Do I sometimes want to shake you until you start crying? Also, yes. Do I think that you are doing everyone a service by making these men shut up? Yes.
But I think that's to a certain extent the really nice thing about literature, because in literature you can allow people the time to grow where, and I don't think that that's necessarily always quote unquote the right thing, but like in your personal life, a lot of times you have to take care of yourself first. And if you're confronted with someone who constantly throws microaggressions towards you, yeah, sure, it would be a nice thing to say, you know, everyone can grow, just give them time and give them space and whatever, and possibly this person really does grow. And yes, it's also true that if everyone who would help them grow leaves them because of their microaggressions, then they're definitely not gonna grow. But like, if it's hurtful towards me constantly, then I'm sorry, I can't do that. There will be times and there will be spaces. I personally, as I'm not affected by racism, I know I can be friends with people who throw out microaggressions, as long as I constantly am like, hey, you do know that was fucked up. Like, I'm not talking right now of like be friends with them and like keep the peace. I'm talking about be friends in that with them and call them out.
Mhm.
And then
If you so choose to maintain
if
that
they
relationship.
if they never change, then it's like, you know what? Fuck this shit anyway. Um but in literature, you can interact with people and you can sympathize with people on a different level than you maybe personally can allow yourself to,
Mm-hmm.
for your own self-protection, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Also, yes, Hugo, the passages from the Bible are so fucked up. Like,
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure I put some markers in there every now and then, but there were so many passages where I was like, oh, okay, all right, what the fuck?
To be honest though, wouldn't surprise me if that was like literal quotes adapted a little bit for fantasy, like
Yeah,
for world
no, not
building
me
sake.
either. Not me either. Like this one, it's not even the worst one, but like
Mhm.
it already sets the tone here, right? It's a very small passage from the so-called Tirasid. Children who seek truth, look to your fathers. Women who seek truth, look to your husbands. Servants who seek truth, look to your masters. All who seek truth, look to the mages. For God makes his wisdom known on their lips and his will known in their work. Love that.
I did
Fuck
also
off.
love the aspect of religion um of it felt very, you know, Christian, and I forgot what it's called in English,
Evangelical.
like Nächstenliebe. It's like
Yeah,
that
yeah.
type of concept
Love
in
thy neighbor.
love thy neighbor in Christian faith, but like the whole thing with Skiona is like, our religion literally says to seek the truth above everything else.
Mm-hmm.
What the fuck
Yeah,
are you on about?
I fully support her crash out, because I'm also over here like, if you're in like even when she enters the high magistracy, there's like a lot of placards all over the place going like, you have to seek truth, and she's over here like, yeah, well, why the fuck are you not listening to the truth, man?
It's like, look, over there, over
I
here.
also found another passage from like the whole like Bible passages, and sometimes also from archmages. This is from an archmage actually, but this one was the one that I marked specifically because I was so fucking fuming. Um and it's the one, I'm not going to read the entire thing, but it is my final determination that the Quen female who dresses improperly, labors outside the house, and engages in all manner of masculine activities unbefitting her supposed sex does not qualify for a woman's rights and protections under tyrannish law. We do not afford the cow gentler treatment than the bull, nor do we afford the mare gentler treatment than the stallion. If we begin making exceptions among our human beasts of burden, sloth will take them, and we, the true tyrannish, will know no peace.
Yeah. And
Like,
that's the thing about books like this, because you know there's people out there being like, this is over the top.
Mm-hmm.
The Tyrannish are comically evil. Yada
yeah,
yada yada yada.
yeah,
And it's like
uh-huh.
every single example of like Quen women aren't called women. Quen being talked about, they're multiplying like bunnies. They are good at listening. They are lazy. They are at the same time somehow good workers.
Like it's
all of those talking points are from white people talking about Black enslaved people. It is what it is. Also, something that I want to talk about specifically when it comes to this passage, because this is something that we've also said, like, I believe that Steph filmed a small crash out about this and posted it on a lot of socials about how some people online, specifically on TikTok, but also in like other, bubbles, I would say, sometimes misqualify this book as a like feminine rage kind of situation. And while there is a woman who is in fact raging at some point, this is not even it's not even scratching the surface of what's happening here. And this passage specifically is so important to me because the continuous point is that while Skiona does in fact suffer under a misogynistic system, that is the point over and over and over again, and no one is denying that, because if you were to deny that, I would in fact hit you over the head with the book, because it's right there. But this passage specifically spells out the point so obviously that this is not necessarily about women against the government. It is about the intersectionality and specifically about the horrific treatment of the indigenous population that is ground quite literally to dust underneath the boots of the current oppressive system. And the reason this is so spelled out in this specific passage is because the Turanish women are still placed above the Quen women, because the Quen women are not even allowed to be called Quen women. They're called Quen females. They are denied their femininity. They are denied their womanhood in order to marginalize them even further. If you call this book Feminine Rage, you've missed the plot. And the plot spells itself out so clearly.
I want to say two things. I don't know if any of you listened to that voice message, but I remember before either of you started sending a really long voice message complaining and being like, fuck TikTok, why is everyone calling this a feminist book? This is not a feminist book.
It's not. No, I don't. I think you said that early on, so I didn't listen to it.
No, it was. I think it was a few weeks even before either of you started reading the book. I think it was before I started rereading the book. It must have been back in April.
I listened to it at some point. I think I don't remember if I did. To be quite honest.
I'm gonna try and see if I can find it again. But the other thing is, that it's also spelled out specifically. Like, there's a reason Skiona is a woman in academia, and it's so the point can be made of the people trying to convince her to go back on what she did with like, do you really want this to be your legacy? Didn't you want to be the woman forging ahead, the pathfinder, path builder? Also, no, I don't think it's a marketing thing.
No, it's a broader book
being stupid
community comprehension thing.
I love that Steph is over here like, I'm trying to dress this up as nicely as possible, and Sarah's just like, no, they're dumb. Like,
like they are my color and they are stupid.
Yes,
Sky. I really
yes.
The whole idea of like pushing women in these nurturing spaces is brought up so many times in the book. And it is, it's so good.
Very much reflective of the state of education as well.
And like, I think, again, what I like so much about this book is it is not diminishing what Skiona goes through as a woman in academia. It is not diminishing the fact that she is judged against, standards that she's never going to fulfill. There are so many misogynistic remarks in this book. I don't think they'd fit on one page, or even 20 for that matter. And that's kind of the point, right? She does suffer, but also she specifically only suffers as a woman. She does not suffer as anything else. And so her meeting Kara as well is also her eyes being forcefully pried apart, because she has resided in this idea of privilege. And again, the book then makes it abundantly clear that none of what Skiona experiences is allowed to be experienced by Quen women. They are specifically denied being part of women. They are not women. They're animals.
Also, and I do think that's like, it's not necessarily something, or we see it not happening like that often, but it is actually one of the first instances where Skiona truly shows that she is treating Tommel on eye level to a certain extent, as far as she can, because there is specifically a scene where she's discussing something with him, and he's like, "Why is my opinion even important? I'm just a Quen." And she goes like, "Okay, why would it, you're right, why would your opinion be important?" But then catches herself and is like, "You do realize that's what people say about women."
Yep.
um so it plays an important role, and there is a lot to be said for that. But it's not the entirety or even the main point of the narrative. This is not a fight for women's rights. She in fact very consciously recognizes, and that's that one passage that Zilla read at the very beginning. She very consciously recognizes that she cannot fight for women in academia or for women's rights as long as these other injustices are still ongoing, because they are intersectional. And as long as there will be Quen treated like brutes and pretended to be brutes, women will be allowed to be oppressed. And as long as women need to be oppressed, there will also be the need for someone else to, endanger these women, so we can continue to act like they are damsels. Yeah.
Yes. I that scene was incredibly hard to get through with all of the rhetoric that the doctor keeps spilling at her. But I will say that it also gave me, again, one of those moments where I was so proud of Skiona, because she kept telling him, like, "Oh no, you're a fucking idiot. Can you listen? Oh my god, you're too stupid to even listen to me. What the fuck is wrong with you?"
I want to ask something. I want to ask something. Is this dark academia?
Oh, that's a good
Why
question.
wouldn't it be?
See, for me, dark academia, like a lot of people use dark academia mainly as the setting or the vibe, as the main reason. For me, dark academia is a book that is mainly about commentary of things that are fucked in academia.
Yeah.
Which this has parts of. But once again, it's not the main part. It's kind of, for me, like the whole, is this a feminist book? Which, yes, but feminism isn't the main point.
Yeah.
Yes, this has a lot of commentary on academia, both in terms of how it treats women, as well as in terms of indigenous knowledge and stealing indigenous knowledge. But it's also just a part of a bigger whole.
I think maybe, for me at least, where the conflict comes in of like, is or is this not dark academia, is, can we fully say that we are in an academic setting when the High Mage Council, or whatever the hell we want to call it, everything that Skiona is part of after she passes that one test at the beginning of the book, can we really say it's academia when it technically also functions as the government?
Yes.
It's not the government. It's not the government.
It isn't, but it has so many roots within the governmental powers that be, at least in that place.
But what I think, because of the fact that it's kind of like in a professorship, when you're expected to publish and you're expected to be a leading resource that is going to further academia as a whole, there you can't separate the two, and therefore I think it is. But like Sarah was saying, it's like that's not the main point that we should be focusing on, but I feel like it can't exist without that context either.
I also, by the way, I just remembered that I found the the moment really interesting, where you have, what was the one with Quen heritage, the mage Stravos or
Stravos, yeah.
something. That moment when she returns to this one hall that she basically like blew the ceiling off, and comments on how he's now a little less redheaded, and he looks a little more Tyranish, and just like the slow neglect of indigenous roots in academia, I found so interesting. But
I still 10 to 10 recommend. I loved it.
It's so good.
Also, I found another scene that I tabbed, which was again this whole idea of like, we let Skiona have her feelings, but we also fully understand of like what exactly, that how privileged she is in a way. This is the scene where she goes to Tommel after she's had those revelations with the doctor in the room, because the doctor didn't really help with the revelation. She basically just talked at him and he didn't know what to do with it, which was hilarious to me in a very dark way. And so she starts telling Tommel that she was sick and that she was crying a lot and so on and so forth. And then she kind of stops herself and she says this part, which I personally found really important. Skiona looked down at her hands, realizing how pointless it would be to describe her suffering to Tommel. He couldn't understand what it was to plunge from towers of light into the dark terrors below. And as someone born among those terrors, why would he care to understand? And I think this is really what ties it together for me personally, because we allow Skiona to have her feelings because for the longest time she believed that the system that she was a part of was at least maybe not fair. I don't think she ever believed in fairness, particularly because she was a woman and because the system is not fair to women whatsoever. But she believed, specifically when it came to magic, she believed in its legitimacy. She believed in everything that these like holy scriptures in a way taught her about where the magic is from, what the other realm is, etc., etc. And now that she's finally seen what exactly goes on, obviously she has a complete breakdown because for her this possibility had never registered, right? But on the other hand, she doesn't feel like it is legitimate to talk about this in front of Tommel the way that she is trying to do here, because she's over here like, I mean, he's not going to understand because he never believed the system to be even remotely fair anyway. Like, he might not have known about the Blight as specifically as he did now, but he's known the Blight. And now that he's put the two together, the way that happens in the world, the way that the Blight is entirely man-made, right? He is more in a world of terror than she could ever be in because he has witnessed the Blight firsthand in the horrendous first chapter that we've had in the book. And so she notices, and this is a bit further past the halfway point. This is around here-ish. This is page 231 for me. And I think it's so interesting to see her growth as a character, because the reason she stops describing her pain is not because, I don't know, she's like, well, my pain doesn't matter. It's my pain doesn't matter to him because we've not started from the same point. And he is the one who has received the most pain in this particular situation. I just got my eyes opened. He had to relive the trauma of his entire existence that was caused by my people.
And something else that I just thought of that I also think is so well done is that Skiona doesn't manage anything on her own, except getting into the High Magistry. But as soon as she gets Tommel as an assistant, none of her realizations, like the moment that she makes progress in her methods or whatever, is always because of Tommel. It's always because he asks questions, he comments, he does something. It's always because of that. And I do also, I mean, it's later on somewhat proven incorrectly, like actually quite soon afterwards, I think. But I do still love this interaction between Tommel and Skiona, where Skiona asks him for honesty, and he's like, I this is like it's a bit dicey. And then she's like, okay, honesty, and like she's like, you can be honest and be polite, and he's like, no, I can't. And he's just like, okay, honest and as polite as possible. And then her going to him in the end and is like, no, fuck politeness, I want you to be honest. Which obviously still doesn't work, which I think is also realistic, that even if you ask for honesty, if you're emotional, and then someone confronts you with, actually, your entire religion so far and belief system has been fucked, I have told you, we've been new. Yes, she falls back into racist commentary, which isn't to be excused. Again, there's ways to have a mental breakdown without completely decimating the other person. It's still realistic though. And the times that we see Skiona acting on her own is pretty much all the times when it's like, no, you shouldn't have done that. You shouldn't have done that. It's the girl that was blighted. It's with her mentor. It's with the Freudian mirror.
It's with her aunt.
With her cousin, I think.
Cousin,
aunt?
yeah, because Alba, yeah.
Yeah.
And the thing that I also do love to a certain extent is how the journey that Skiona takes also is from someone, yes, she had family who has cared for her, but she has never really acted as part of that family or as part of that community. Whereas with Tommel and Kara, she starts building her own community and she starts becoming part of that community, whether it's warranted or not. So you have like this kind of double journey also.
Speaking of double journeys and things being mirrored, I also find it very interesting, coming back to the truth comment, how once again we have these two sides, one of which relies almost entirely on lies and manipulation. We have explicit passages where we know about the High Mages having destroyed or having, censored historical annals. We have the whole thing about the euphemistic forms of death. We have the whole thing about never telling anyone what happens, even though it is explicitly mentioned that basically every single high mage who has done anything of any import knows where the other realm is, knows where the magic is coming from. We have all of that. And then on the other hand, we have Tommel, who tells his 15-year-old niece the exact undecorated and brutal truth about what he's learned about the Blight and how it has been man-made. And we have this direct clash, again, first of all, with Skiona telling Tommel, you can tell me the truth and be polite, and Tommel being like, no, I cannot. And if I tell you the truth, you're going to react badly. And then Skiona reacting badly. But we also have this very briefly in a moment where Skiona learns that Kara knows and is basically like, oh my god, she's a child, you can't tell her that. And Tommel being like, well, I can, though, because I need to tell her the truth. And it works so incredibly well in this, like, and the thing that makes it so interesting to me personally is because from the beginning onwards, Skiona reads as a character who values the truth, who does in fact want to know how things work. It's just that the incredibly harsh and ugly truths of her world do in fact throw her for a loop, which is understandable, even though her actions afterwards are not excusable, but it is understandable where she's coming from. But it's so interesting to see her ideals of truth be completely challenged by the fact that she learns that there has in fact been no truth in her worldview whatsoever. Nothing.
Although, to be fair, I do think that while, yes, truth is important, Tommel does also blame himself a lot for putting this on Kara and how
Oh yeah.
um how it is. And it's where is it?
When you try to find the quotes.
I have yeah, it's the thing of like generally I love how much world building is done with the Caldone. We get so little information about them and yet so much. Like there's this thing and I do think that that's something that generally is done a little bit too much sometimes within like post-colonialism of like Western is all individualism, non-Western is all community, where it becomes very binary. But generally speaking, we do have a lot of these what's it called, developments that within Western society things have become more and more towards individualism, whereas previously it was a lot more communal paced. And a lot of pre-colonial societies were also very communal based, and marginalized societies have that to this point still. That a lot of marginalized societies are more communal based because there's more strength within community. But here you also have it that like in Tiranish society is very selfish, whereas Kaldane is all community based, where you have Kaldan deities, where all gods of community. um these gods were great because through all their push and pull, they left the world more than they took from it. The Kaldane had been a great tribe because they had lived by those ideals. The tribe was the self, and the self was the tribe. But when there was no tribe, there was only Tummel piling his pain onto his sister's daughter. And when did trying to keep that pain alive become an act of weakness, of ego? Tommel had used Kara's precious few memories of their parents, twisted them to take some of the pain off of his own soul, and at some point that pain had to supersede all that had been good about the Kaldane. And I do love how like this like living alone just like on how many levels that the Tiranish society has destroyed them, or like in Tommel's view has destroyed them. And it's also why I do love the scene where Skiona tells Tommel, you did good by Kara.
Yes.
You were great for her. Where I do think it's acknowledged, because I do think we got it from Tommel's point of view, and I do think it's acknowledged that like yeah, Skiona can't really judge it from a Kaldane perspective, but it still feels really good to hear that. And then by the end, we do get that community again, but now not the community of just Kaldane, but I think it's Kaldane and Andrasta specifically.
Yeah, it is.
So
I also think, and I'm trying to make this as much into a closing point as possible because we are approaching the 2-hour mark. Whoopsies. I really like the conversations this book brings up about selfishness versus selflessness. And it's partially in what you said, Sarah. It's also in the whole thing of like Skiona oscillating between, you know, being the exceptional woman TM who made it into the high mage, into the magistry, versus thinking of herself as a deeply selfish person, versus also maybe not being that much of a selfish person, especially towards the end when she makes herself or lets herself be made into this instrument of downfall for the high magistry. And also in all of these conversations about like who do you blame? What is your guilt for? Do you say that you did this for the people? Is this an excuse or is this an actual reason? And what's going on there? I like the conversations the book has here because once again, we don't have a solution to anything. We basically just have things being thrown in there. Like also how Tamil tells Skiona, if you want to do this being blowing up the High Magistry, don't do it for me and Kara. Do it for yourself.
That was actually with the Frame and Mirror earlier.
Oh, really? Was it?
Yeah, because the blowing up thing, Tommel makes the decision.
Oh, right. Yeah, the Frame and Mirror of showing everyone what's going on. Yeah. Like, he doesn't want to be an excuse for her essentially inciting because he knew it was going to incite a riot. He tells her specifically, this is going to end bloody, and I don't want to be the excuse for that. If you want to do this, you're doing this. You.
I will also say something that just is hurting, not gonna lie, with how Skiona accepts the Quen worldview by the end of, like, you know, because intention versus effect is like a big theme. Where you have the Tyrannish where intention is the important thing and the Quen where the effect is the important thing. And Skiona pretty much dies with the not the realization but like the conviction of I will go to hell.
Yeah.
I have left the world a net negative, thus I will go the hell. Which I'm not sure by, you know, according to narrative if that is true, but it's like it's so heartbreaking that that's her belief, but also she has made peace with this. It's not something that she fights over or that's a painful thing for her, but she's like, yeah.
And I think the reason this hits so good is because she starts out as this person who's like, intention is the most important thing, as the, you know, I am trying to do something good. Is it good for me or good for everyone? I don't know, but I am trying to do something good. And it ends in her being like, actually, I'm going to hell, but I am dragging every single one of you with me. So there we go.
And the interesting thing is that we are introduced to her also in terms of her making a judgment of herself being a bad person, but according to Tyrannish belief system with the intention.
Everything comes full circle in this book. It is such a beauty of narrative.
Amazing.
Also, just so the guys who haven't read this book know, this is the precise quote that Sarah means because I found it here. With her soul in the spiral on its way to hell, Skiona's last thought was not of vengeance or legacy. It was of love.
It was so good.
Yeah, it's we don't even get an inner monologue of like, I'm going to hell because yada yada. It's just
no.
No,
it's
so good.
Yeah.
Yay.
I gotta give sort of Kaigen a reread at some point, but I think I need to be in a more stable emotion.
That is so fair.
Speaking of which, so this book club is a quarterly book club, so meaning we'll be meeting approximately every 3 months.
Probably.
So, give or take, that's the goal. So based on that timeline, our next, I guess this would be the spring meeting then, because the next one
would be probably
August.
Yeah, August.
Yeah. We have not chosen what the next book is going to be, but if anyone wants to join, where can they find? Do we have the Discord link posted?
I just remembered I forgot to put the Discord. I put both of your channels in the description. I'm gonna still add the Discord.
Nice.
Also, funnily enough, I'm not sure I agree with this. It made me cry more, definitely. Like,
there's a quantity of heartbreaking moments, but this is the quality of heartbreaking moments.
I haven't read Sword of Kaigen yet, so I'll get back to you, Sky.
Yes, and I don't think we have decided yet on what to continue on.
No, we haven't.
Reading
We
what
haven't.
what we will be reading. I think we have decided that we're not gonna do just one genre.
Yes.
We're gonna do a pick of genres. We
Yes.
will probably, for some time at least, keep reading books that we think we will enjoy.
Yes, that's the
Listen, guys,
goal.
we need a break, okay? We've suffered for over a year. It's really nice to be able to see Sarah and Steph and not associate them with misery, okay? We need this. I need it.
Not the week before being like comments, I don't want to anymore. Although, not gonna lie, I would.
No, Howell, please.
No,
No,
no. I love you, but no.
I would love the concept of this continuing being something where one of us forces the other two to read a book that we gave 5 stars to under the guise of
No, that's scary to me.
read this critically.
I don't know if I could do that.
But yes, we're gonna decide
Amazing.
what to read.
Well, we have sprints on my channel in about 30 minutes.
Yes.
So people
I need
wanna,
food before
yes.
that.
We're gonna take a break to like get snacks, get settled, and then if anyone wants to keep hanging out with us. Also, my co-host for the Star Wars Readathon, Eric, will be joining us there. So be hanging out.
The Raven Scholar, I think Scylla already started reading that.
I mean, I gave it 5 stars, so you know it would fit. It's a really good book. I really loved it, honestly.
Yes.
Okay. I think it's time for us to
So see you in 30 minutes, and some people in the comments maybe also. Let's see.
Yay.
Bye-bye.
Bye, y'all. Bye. Oh, yeah.
This won't stop.
Oh, are we still live?